Hello. Good evening. I like this energy. Hi, I'm Peter Jonathan Bell. I'm the curator of European painting, sculpture, and drawings here at the Cincinnati Art Museum, and I would like to welcome you here this evening to the members' opening of Rodin Response, Field Family Secrets, and to our very special guest lecture tonight. So a little bit about, just a tiny bit about the exhibition. We'll get on with it. For the last 7 months or so, the museum has had the fortune to exhibit 4 bronzes from Rodin's Burghers of Calais, one of which is here to my left, your right, thanks to the Iris Cantor Collection. We are grateful to Mrs. Cantor and to Judith Sobel, the curator of the Cantor Collection, for this opportunity. I would also like to thank the Harold C. Schott Foundation, organizing sponsor for this exhibition, and the Wolfgang Herschede Foundation for providing additional support. I have had the distinct privilege over the last year of working with the artist and educator Supermarin to create this exhibition. It is her life experience, her artistic and pedagogical practice, and her passion and dedication that have shaped the beautiful and thought-provoking exhibition that we are celebrating tonight. So Marin's here with us. If we could just give her a hand. Stand up. Also with us tonight are several of the other artists that are represented in the exhibition. So if you have work in the show, could you please stand up and let us thank you. Okay, on to tonight's edification. Adrienne L. Childs is an art historian and curator based in Washington, D.C., where she is a senior consulting curator at the Phillips Collection. She has degrees from Georgetown and Howard Universities and received her PhD in art history at the University of Pennsylvania, University of Maryland. I said it right, I wrote it wrong. University of Maryland, where she also served as curator of the David C. Driskell Center, organizing numerous exhibitions there of art by African Americans. To cite only her most recent projects, last year she co-curated The Color of Anxiety, Race, Sex, and Disorder in Victorian Sculpture for the Henry Moore Institute in Leeds, in England. And right now, in Montclair, New Jersey, you can see Century, 100 Years of Black Art at the Montclair Art Museum, which she also co-curated. Dr. Childs has published widely on race and representation in European art, as well as African American art. Her current book, Ornamental Blackness, The Black Figure in European Decorative Arts, is forthcoming from Yale University Press. This fall, Childs will be the Distinguished Senior Scholar at the Lauder Research Center for Modern Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And if you remember one thing from my remarks, remember this: Dr. Childs will return to Cincinnati soon. She is co-curator of the upcoming exhibition Vivian Brown, My Kind of Protest, which will open at the Contemporary Arts Center, Cincinnati, our own CAC, before going on to the Phillips Collection in Washington. That opens in January. Many of you, like me, probably may have missed her 2020 exhibition, Riffs and Relations, African American Artists and the European Modernist Tradition, at the Phillips Collection due to the timing of the pandemic and shutdowns, which is incredibly disappointing. But luckily, you can visit the exhibition virtually on the Phillips website, and I really highly recommend it. And you can consult Dr. Childs' award-winning catalog here in our library. That exhibition, along with several of the other strands of her expertise that I alluded to, puts a very fine point on our reasons for inviting her tonight, and our joy at her acceptance of that invitation. The concept of response that lies at the heart of our exhibition echoes and harmonizes with the riffs and relations of Dr. Child's 2020 show at the Phillips Collection. Artists study other artists. Art begets art. It seems like a pedantic truism, but I think we will find from Dr. Child's remarks tonight that it can be a thrilling lens on the art of today and the art of history. So with that, join me in welcoming Dr. Adrienne Childs.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Can y'all hear me? I really appreciate it being here. Thank you to Peter Bell, Haley Perkins, and the whole team here for inviting me. What a wonderful introduction. I'm delighted to come to Cincinnati, it's world-class museum on the occasion of the opening of Rodin Response Family Field Secrets. I've been thinking about writing about the art of response, that we're going to talk about tonight, for years. And it's a pleasure to pull together some of my fragmented thoughts for you tonight. And as I've come through the museum, I saw a lot of objects and things that might resonate with you in my talk, that you might see some artists that you have here at the museum. Before I rattle on and prattle on for 45 minutes, I thought I would, and tell you about this issue, I thought I would show you one of my favorite creative responses. Often words get in the way, but sometimes the sort of intangible alchemy between the art and the response is all you need or to know or to feel. Now, of course, I don't even know, there we go. So in this video, Little Buck responds to both the architecture of the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris and the exhibition Icons of Modern Art from the Shukin Collection. Shukin was a Russian businessman who amassed a huge collection of School of Paris art early in the 20th century. So just take a look, and hopefully which one do I? Make sure the sound is turned upside down.
I was born in Chicago, raised in Memphis, Tennessee. Didn't start dancing until I was like 11 years old. The dance style I do, it's a dance style that started with Memphis underground rap music. And that music, the way it was produced, gave us a certain bounce. When I was around 16 years old, I got into ballet. We made a deal with this artistic director. We would teach hip hop and then they would teach us some ballet, and that's how it happened. As performing artists and as dancers, we see everything as art.
That was beautiful. Yeah, it's just mesmerizing. You can find that online. Just email me, I'll give you a link. So as Little Buck dances through the, because I said just look at it, you don't have to have words, and now I'm going to start talking too much. As Little Buck dances through the building, he brings his own history, Chicago to Memphis, hip-hop ballet, his Americanness, his youth, his blackness, to bear on these works of art. He's dancing with what some might think of as the very beginnings of modernism in painting. For me, his is a more formalist response. His lyrical movements help me see the art anew. But because of his presence in the room, we can also kind of step back and take a time to think about the dialogue between blackness and modernism. As he moved through the last gallery, I don't know if you noticed, there were a few African masks and cases along the side to the right of the painting, and to the left. Now, and then we're confronted, with the role that African creativity played in the modernist project. The fraught dynamic continues to resonate in the works of contemporary artists' responses to modernism for more than a century. But like I said, I don't know that that was Little Buck's concept, but I appreciate his response. He said in the video, we think of everything as art, and so he comes to it as with a pure sort of artist response. So the artist response, it is an almost conventional practice in museums today. I wondered how this trend came to be and who it serves, how it has evolved over the years, what are its characteristics, et cetera. Of course, I'm not going to have any answers. I'm going to ask you at the end to tell me the answers to those questions. But these are the two kinds of responses that I will focus on this evening. The artist-driven response that often comes from contemporary artists who are engaging with legacies of art history as a source of nourishment, or perhaps art history or perhaps they're challenging sort of the tyranny of art history and its exclusionary practices. They often address canonical artists and works. The artists that I have primarily looked at, Black artists, are coming to the conversation from the margins, right? They're historically sort of outcasts from the mainstream, if you will. But they use the familiarity of the source to gain notice. I mean, well, at least several artists that I talked to said, I use riffing on European art so people will notice me, and they'll come in and say, oh, let's look at it, because they have a way in, right? And they use this to engage some kind of a dialogue with the past. So you see in that category, I have Faith Ringgold's story quilt, Matisse's model. And Ringgold puts herself, her avatar of herself, it's a model, into Matisse's studio as she's sort of infiltrating this mythic space. She's both the model and the artist in this case. So that's one kind of response, the artist's response on their own. We also have institutional responses, which we have here today, initiated by curators, directors, and grounded in the museum space or tethered to the collection. In more recent years, institutions have been inviting contemporary artists to intervene into their collections, like on a regular basis. These are often artists of color, or from groups not typically traditionally represented in that museum. This practice has become relevant, particularly if the museum collections are problematic, or in this era of sort of reconsidering the stories we tell ourselves about art, the collections have suddenly been deemed problematic. Or the institution itself has been criticized for being exclusive in its collecting or in the hiring of curators or in the cultivation of its leadership. So there's a lot of noise out there, and the museums are responding to that. So perhaps the institution is seen as out of touch with the community in which it lives, right? And so there's a lot of reasons why institutions have looked into this practice. And sometimes maybe they don't know how to address it, or this has been one way of addressing it. And these responses can go a long way in bringing people in the door. But the question remains, are they productive? Are they healing? What is the result? And I think it's something that we should talk about during the Q&A period. And I just put in the Monkman installation at the Met as an example of an institutionally generated response that we'll talk a little bit about at the end. So how did all this start? I have no idea really how it all started, but since we're looking at issues of modernism that keep circling back to Picasso, and it's interesting, starting with Little Buck, and as we go through, we get these engagements with Picasso that I did not intend, but it's nice thread. So we're looking at issues of modernism and keep circling back to Picasso. I'll start with him. And it's interesting, in 1955, after Matisse died, Picasso started to meditate on Matisse's odalisques, and he embarked on a sustained response to Delacroix's original painting of the women of Algiers, right? And so he's thinking about Matisse, but going back to Delacroix as this sort of OG Orientalist painter who's interested in the notion of the odalisque, which was something, of course, we know that Matisse really seized upon. So he's drawing a through line from Delacroix to himself. So in 1957, now this is just 2 years after Picasso painted this, he just went crazy, 15 canvases, and he dates them on the day that he makes them, and then many, many drawings. So in all 15 of Picasso's responses to Delacroix's Women of Algiers were on display in MoMA's 75th anniversary. So MoMA does a show for Picasso's 75th anniversary, and they got all 15 of these responses to the Women of Algiers. And how did they get those? Because there was a very important collector of Picasso's work at the Gans family, and they literally bought all 15 from Picasso's dealer in Paris and brought them to New York. So this is sort of a network of support, if you will, for this kind of thing. The Gans eventually sold some of those works. But I'm talking about Picasso because unlike the artists that we will hopefully get to today, if we can get out of Picasso, unlike those artists, Picasso is looking back from a position of power. So I wanted to make that really clear. That's why we have to look at him. Fully vested, right, in this art history, the history of art that he is engaging. He felt that he was honoring Matisse's legacy. Matisse, of course, was his buddy, a rival and buddy, through Delacroix, a legacy that he had access to and had full rights to. So the point I want to make here is that the relationship among the artists, these artists, Picasso and those he's looking back to, are built and sustained within a certain system, within the system, right? The system of art education, the system of art making, the exhibiting institutions, the system of art criticism, who's writing about them, what are they writing about, who are they writing about, the system of art history, what are people like me lecturing about, what's in the textbooks, the system of collecting and philanthropy, the philanthropists who said, okay, I'm buying 15 of the paintings, we're gonna put them all up here 2 years after they're done, right? I mean, it's a really, so if you're in the system, it's fantastic. And of course, MoMA is part of that, and I'm not mad at them. I'm not mad at MoMA. They're part of that system, and they have documented all of their historic exhibitions. So this is a photo of the actual 1957 exhibition. So MoMA's part of that system, but it's something that we need to be very aware of. And I don't think, just as an aside, it's any surprise that one of the Picassos that belonged to the Ganses at one point sold for a record when it sold for $179 million in 2015. Okay, well, that's lovely. But what happens when the responses come from the outside of that system? What happens when the responder is not included in that artistic lineage? He's from another country, another time, another cultural tradition. So American Beat Generation artist Bob Thompson was one of the first Black American artists to devote the majority of his creative art output to the art of the response. to quoting European art, to riffing on the masters. It was a bold project for a Black artist in the civil rights and emerging Black arts movement era to set aside these like pressing social concerns, right, in the 60s, and focus on the history of art, the history of white art. It did not serve Black cultural uplift. I mean, and you know, that's really, really interesting when they talk about the history of white art. And now I'm really going off the rails. When I was studying European art, people would ask me, why are you studying white art? Okay, I mean, you know, as if you don't have any right to that story, to tell that story. And, you know, it's such a big field. Anyway, I digress. So it didn't serve Black cultural uplift, and he got needled for that, but he didn't care. He was his own unique character, and of course went his own way. But his case reveals the tensions that build up regarding who has the standing, and that's the word we have to think about, standing. I hope there's some lawyers in here that can tell us what that really means. Who has the standing to even engage the discussion? And it is this tension between whether or not you have standing to talk about this stuff that today, we curators, now we want that tension. We seek it out. Come, bring it into the museum. Let's put it in the room with the burghers of Calais and think about what some of those where the rub might be, right? But and frictions might be, and then you learn something from that. But at that time, that wasn't really the case. I think. Now, while living in Europe between 61 and 63, Thompson began a large body of work that responded to Francisco Goya's Los Caprichos, his series of prints that satirized the follies and foibles and tragedies of human behavior. This is Goya's print, Hasta la muerte, Until Death, a commentary on female vanity, in which a woman past her prime is primping like a young bride. Now, Thompson's variation takes the source at its core, but refashions it with schematized figures in this sort of non-naturalistic landscape and colors, and he adds these strange creatures that kind of echo some of the strange creatures we find in Goya. And it's a bizarre. His works are all kind of what I would call maybe bizarre. They're hard to read, and they come from his singular imagination. But he was not intent on mounting a critique as an outsider or invading, as some artists will do. But as an outsider, as a Black artist, his work in this vein has always been difficult to categorize. People want to categorize you. And now his dear friend, Meyer Shapiro, wrote a tribute after the artist died, after Thompson died young, stating that Thompson was, quote, mad about color and rhythm. He was a natural artist, closer in spirit to the unlettered Negro musicians that he loved than to writers. Yet his idols were great masters Piero della Francesca, Raphael, and Poussin, and I'm going to add Goya to that. So not only is Shapiro primitivizing and infantilizing Thompson, who he really cared for, because he's Black, he sets up this sort of discordance between being Black and idolizing the masters. Like, wow, that's just so unusual and different. He can do both. Yet, you know, so that's as if these two things are incompatible. How could you be both? So it's just that attitude that that Black artists are not truly related to the masters that inspired, it's that attitude, you know, that Black artists aren't related to this tradition, that inspired Robert Colescott, and I love this picture of him. He is a true and tried and true contrarian. It inspired him to devote his energies to challenging that narrative and to gaining full access to these histories of art. A good part of his career was spent on carrying on a body exchange with familiar images, using irony, humor, satire, and stereotype, often tinged with sexist misogyny. And he's sitting in front of a painting called Sunday Afternoon with Joaquin Murrieta, who was in my show Riffs and Relations, and of course, it's a riff on what? Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. But of course, I didn't choose to talk about that today because I've lost my mind with Picasso. I apologize. In an effort to explore different aspects of the artist's response, I thought of Colescott's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, of course a riff on Picasso's work. In this case, I believe that Colescott was not only responding to the painting, of course, but responding to an exhibition, and that's why I have it here. And of course, Colescott didn't tell me he was responding to an exhibition. I'm just putting a spin on that because he does it in '85, right after this exhibition is put on by MoMA. So MoMA's primitivism in 20th century art, affinity of the tribal and the modern. It was something that was criticized for its problematic view of the relationship between the so-called primitive objects that you see there on the wall, largely oceanic and African objects, and the development of modernist practice. Many of the connections were loose and decontextualized. The exhibition elided the violence of the colonial context through which these objects were obtained. How did all those things get to Europe? Nobody even asked that. It also established a kind of hierarchy between the modernist sort of intellectual process of making art look primitive and the actual quote-unquote primitive art that shaped the African and oceanic, the primitive sort of impulses. So the intellectual process of making your stuff look like it's primitive is pit against the actual quote-unquote primitive objects. I believe Colescott's painting that transforms Picasso's prostitutes was clearly indebted to, obviously, to his absorption of African art. But Colescott transforms that with black women, and that's his way of calling out Picasso's debt to blackness writ large. Here, Colescott reappropriates Picasso, the appropriator. Now, in 2024, a curator would love to triangulate Picasso, Colescott, and those masks. But in 1985, Colescott staged his protest from outside of the institution. And he loved to stoke the flames. And he actually upset many black audiences because they felt that he was spreading negative stereotypes. And this is just one of many stereotypes that he engaged with. And as disruptive as this was to everybody, Colescott thought Picasso was a genius. He thought Picasso was a worthy opponent. He appreciated Picasso's, all of the things we've got, his boldness, his macho-ness, all of that. Probably appreciated the fact that he was also a misogynist, but never mind that. I didn't say that, I didn't say it. So he was really challenging Picasso as an equal, right? So this was a kind of a complex, multi-layered response that takes aim at absolutely everyone. So these are, again, from the outside. But by the 1990s, this notion of challenging the museum, so Colescott challenges museum on his own. By the 1990s, this notion of challenging the museum was codified in the groundbreaking exhibition, Mining the Museum, curated by artist Fred Wilson at the Maryland Historical Society. Here, we start to see the real explosive potential of the contemporary response cultivated by the museum. In this case, Wilson pits the museum against itself, pits its own collection against itself. Through creative installations, juxtapositions, and unusual combinations, he causes the viewer to see things differently. Here, he's challenging the collection by, with an array of cigar store Indians, and this is what we call them, I'm just quoting, putting them in quotes. And he called them cigar store owners. He called them cigar store owners, but they were, of course, these statues that would go out in front of cigar stores. And on the wall are actual photos of Native Americans who lived in it's a historical society, so they've got a lot of images of people in the community. So they're having a conversation between the cigar store Indians, stereotype, and the actual people. And so you as a viewer have to come over and look over their shoulder to find out what's going on in there. So they're dealing with this issue on their own. So, Wilson was really, this was a new, really, not necessarily for him, but it was new for for museum practice, particularly this very conservative institution. Now, Wilson's clever juxtaposition of luxury silver, and I saw a beautiful piece out there, a beverage set, and slave shackles says volumes without words, so I did not need to be there. We see the relationship between luxury and slave labor upon which that luxury is built. In this response to the historic collection, he undermines the entire sense of history's unquestioned order and history's unquestioned vigor. Reactions were strong. Now, the museum staff became concerned about some of his choices, particularly one in which he wanted to put a KKK hood, which is in their collection, they had, in a baby's stroller. They didn't like that, but he did it anyway. KKK hood in a baby stroller. I don't have a good photo of that. See, this is before they were taking really good pictures of these installations. So one visitor said that this show would make black visitors and black people hate white people. And so this is a familiar refrain that we're kind of hearing now. I'm going off on the political tangent. Coming from people who think that teaching black history in school is going to make white people feel guilty and black people hate white people. So they're questioning. So in other words, questioning these kinds of history. What is it doing for us by telling us these histories? But of course, those are anecdotes. Most people really enjoyed it and really started thinking about history in all kinds of different ways. And certainly those of us who, I didn't see it, but I have the catalog, so that's the way that always goes. And you know, we start thinking about history. I just put this piece in my book, Ornamental Blackness, where I talk about a lot of 18th, 19th century European decorative arts and their relationship to black figures as a real conceptual way of thinking about the underpinnings of luxury and servitude. But as we move into the new century, historic sites begin to regularly solicit contemporary responses. You're looking at Ballantyne House in Newark, New Jersey, and it's part of the Newark Museum. And it's a lovely Belle Epoque mansion built by the Ballantyne beer family. Have you guys ever heard of Ballantyne beer? My husband's not here. His family used to drink a lot of Ballantyne beer. And I saw that, I said, I wonder, is this related? And yes, they had made their fortune. And to celebrate the museum's 100th anniversary, they decided to commission works for the Ballantyne House and the museum itself. Now, curator Krista Clark, who all disclosure is a very good friend of mine, engaged the British-Nigerian artist Yinka Shonibare to develop a site-specific installation in the Ballantyne House. And you'll notice I'm trying to put up pictures of the artist, because, you know, this stuff doesn't just create itself or make itself. Everything related to a real person, really born sometime, and, you know, so I think it's really good to see who we're talking about. So this process was a rigorous one in which Shonibare researched the house and the historic interior to develop an appropriate work in keeping with his own aesthetic that he had already established. And you have that piece out in front, and you'll see the fabric patterns that he uses. Prior to Shonibare's intervention, the curators had tried to activate the house in other ways that made it more relevant to the Newark community, right? And they did have some success, but someone came in, I read something that said that one of them came, the teacher said, listen, why am I gonna bring my underprivileged, really, quite frankly, poor black kids from the inner city in here to this house to see all this luxury? There's no connection. They just felt like there was no connection. Why should I bring them there? So the museum is doing things to try to, like I said, activate this home. And one of the things was getting Shonibare to do Party Time. Reimagine America. It was a dynamic installation depicting a fantasy dinner party installed in the mansion's elegant Victorian dining room. And look at the mahogany walls, actual Tiffany windows by Louis Comfort Tiffany. So they were, you know, right in with the opulence of the Gilded Age. Shonibare's rowdy guests are eating sumptuous food. There's raw oysters on the plates, quail eggs, there's red wine in the glasses. One guy is spilling the glass and the red wine is coming out plastic, like plastic grapes on the table. And so the group is raucously inebriated. One lady has her legs up on the table, and other two people are kissing, but nobody has heads, right? And this is all kind of part of Shonobari's aesthetic, but I'm talking about sort of this process. So, and they're also dressed in period clothing, Victorian clothing made from the African fabrics that were actually imported from Dutch manufacturers, so there's all of that complexity. The excess bright colors and animated actions rub up against the stagnant interior. The piece achieves the goal to animate the space, and it was well received by visitors, young and old, who were delighted by the details. The kids would come in and see things and that were funny and cool. There's a peacock being served. You see on the servant there in the back. It's got like, so I mean, they felt that, they felt represented. Some of the visitors felt represented in some ways. They recognized the black visitors recognized the African fabrics as sort of another kind of dynamic. And so it was a success, and it worked on many levels. For me, and I just think it's fantastic, I think of the history of mahogany, right? As I've been working on things like materials and materials that were part of the colonial world, I think of mahogany and the history and its roots in slave labor. I even look at the oysters on the table, and I think about the black labor that behind the seafood industry on the East Coast, and that is a very strong history there. I think of America as part of a wider sort of black Atlantic born of colonialism. So there's many levels in which this intervention into this space can work. But Party Time is executed in a way that is entertaining and inviting. So with one big stroke, Shonobari is able to really conjure many different responses and ideas on many levels. Speaking of colonialism and slavery, England has been coming to terms with its role in that system in recent years. One way of doing that is to look at their historic properties and collections, reframing objects that had languished without context for literally centuries. Now, we just talked about Shonobari responding to the whole space and the whole notion of this home. This is a response to a specific object. The curators of Kensington Palace invited Graham Mortimer Evelyn to respond to John Nost's Baroque polychrome sculpture, Bust of a Moor. Now it's called something else. They've changed the names of a lot of these problematic images and objects, but I kind of think that the old names give you a sense of how they were considered at the time, so it's interesting. But this was, the sculpture was originally commissioned by King William III in 1688. And Evelyn, and it's been, I won't say languishing, it's been in Kensington Palace. I saw it for many years, and it is a beautiful piece. And it's polychrome, it's marble, it's very elegant, and the bust is like a Roman emperor would be put in this bust. So the bust really elevates the sky. But he has a slave collar on, and he's clearly a slave. But the luxury surroundings, the palace, there wasn't really clear about what that was. And I think that Mortimer comes in, or Evelyn comes in, and tries to make it a little bit more clear as to who this guy actually was, even though we don't really know who he was, right? That's one of the problems. We have very little information on the actual sitter. It may be a portrait and it may not be. And we do know, though, that William of Orange, who's coming from the Netherlands to be King of England, there's a procession through the city. You have to come in big with a lot of Africans in his retinue. That was part of his pageantry. This was supposed to be his favorite servant. So Mortimer's project is both a critique of the institution of slavery and an effort to uncover hidden histories lost. Hidden histories or lost histories. And so he does this with these tiles, as you see the interior there with all the tiles going around. The tiles inside the cage fabulate, we like to say fabulate, or imagine a narrative of the Moor's life, where he came from, who his family may have been, how he got to where he is now. So he's this imagined narrative. This is a project of recovery, of making history out of absence. And that is achieved through this sort of imaginary intervention, this responsive imagination, because there is not very much we can go on by that. With this kind of object. And this is the kind of object that I write about in Ornamental Blackness on your shelf next year. By 2020s, curators had absorbed the practice of bringing in outside voices, contemporary responses, critiques, and reflections and refractions. Curators are now bringing in these things into the gallery, things that are objects already created. So seeing what artists are doing out there on their own, they utilize this practice to help interpret their collections. What does this do? I love this example of the installation at the Baltimore Museum of Art inside the Cone Collection gallery that features the Cone sisters' collection of French Impressionist art. Inside that gallery, Simone Lee's Meredith is on a standoff with Degas' Little Dancer at age 14. And maybe it's not a standoff, that's probably too strong. Meredith is an obvious outlier, but one that works in tandem with Degas. According to the curator, situating the work in BMA's Cone galleries initiates a whole new conversation about Black women and girls, about networks of care, creative collaboration, and knowledge sharing. So they're looking this as this sort of a building up. Here, Lee is an advocate, right, for Black women, rather than a detractor of Degas. She's not trying to tear Degas down, she's trying to bring her vision or her understanding of Black women and Black women's histories that go all the way back to Africa with the Raffia into this conversation. And we know that Degas' Little Dancer was not exactly the height of the social scene in Paris. I mean, she was not well received, let's just put it that way. She was a girl that would have been thought of as kind of a little grungy girl in the ballet. And so he did her in wax, and it was just not well received. So we're lifting both of these young girls up. And so she's sort of offering alternative readings of youth and beauty in that conversation with Degas. So for major institutions that have had a reputation of being exclusionary, they have decided to go big. In the wake of the racial reckoning around the Black Lives Matter movement, many institutions have been over backwards to demonstrate their commitment to bringing in diverse voices. And these often come in the form of artistic commissions and responses to historic collections. And in the interest of time, I don't know how much time, we started late, so I'm gonna go over. I will point out that the Monkman, Kent Monkman, gotta love him, this is his installation in the Great Hall at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and his two huge paintings that address the collection from his point of view. He's a Cree artist from Canada, and his whole artistic practice has been about sort of engaging that art, history, from his unique point of view. And here's one of the paintings where he quotes from a lot of different paintings and objects in the museum, but creates a new tableau welcoming newcomers. But what I thought was really interesting is Monkman performed in the gallery as his alter ego, Mischief Eagle Testicle. Yes, indeed. Like Little Buck, Mischief, you see? You gotta love this guy. Mischief dances through the galleries, but toward very different ends. Mischief's performance is a provocation. It questions the romantic views of the Indian in American art through her gender fluid, sort of campy persona. Like again, this is Monkman in this persona of Mischief, and this is not the first, there's a whole array of, this is what he does often. And even in the painting, we have Mischief is in the painting. And he's here, Miss Chief is here kind of engaging with Augustus St. Gaudens's sort of neoclassical sculpture of Hiawatha, which is a romanticized view, obviously, of Native Americans. And Miss Chief is bringing a kind of campy, humorous engagement with it, but also making us think about how we have looked at the sort of romanticized Native American culture for so long. Even this teepee dress in front of Lloyd's Washington crossing the Delaware, thinking about American history and what about that whole notion of sort of manifest destiny and who's left out and who's destroyed, et cetera. So there's a lot of layers going on, but again, in a kind of complicated, campy way. I wanted to show a little video. I didn't think we'd have time, and I couldn't figure out how to cut the video. So I would suggest you go on the Met's website to look at Kent Monkman talking about this, and you'll see the video of Miss Chief spinning through the galleries. In the end, the art of response is a practice that has enhanced our abilities to think about historical materials, objects, and stories in different ways. It is both a reflection back and a generative force that is creating new forms. Contemporary responses can also help us access art that seems distant and impenetrable. It seems irrelevant and dormant, but it can be definitely brought back to life through these new interpretations. And with that, I have some other objects that I would like to show you about an upcoming exhibition, but first, I think it's time to take questions. Thank you. I'm getting ready to fall off.
Dr. Childs has kindly agreed to take a few questions. Haley has a
Please wait for
microphone.
the microphone. Yes.
You wait for the microphone, then everyone can hear you and the recording can hear you. Does anyone have a question? Or a comment? Or
Not all at
Somebody was
once.
supposed to ask me, I told you what to ask me, whether or not these interventions work. How do they work for you?
Thanks for the talk. It was great. I guess my question isn't if they work, but I was curious to your thoughts, since there is a kind of long trajectory of this type of practice now, starting from people like Fred Wilson, in the present moment when a lot of big art institutions are, a little bit in crisis. People are criticizing the sort of larger project of the museum, and there's issues of funding and audience. How you see, what's the kind of current state of this practice, or how do you see it evolving?
Well, I think it probably will have to evolve because you don't want it to be used thoughtlessly. But I think it's still something that's very relevant. People are scrambling scrambling is not the word, but I think it's something that that institutions are still very much doing. I was going to talk about this exhibition I saw last year at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts that partnered with the African American Museum there. It was called Rising Sun, and it was all new commissions. For the entire thing at PAFA was new commissions, and they were all responding to a chair by that Benjamin Franklin sat in. He just signed the Declaration of Independence, and on the back of the chair is a rising sun. Was it George Washington who sat in the chair? Somebody sat in the chair, but Benjamin Franklin, that smart behind Benjamin Franklin said, does this mean the sun is rising or setting on America? And they're literally signing the Declaration of Independence. So this is how, America is just starting, and he says that rising sun on the back of the chair, that's the question, is the sun rising or setting on America? And America didn't even hardly exist. So the question that they asked the artists in 2023 is sun rising or setting on America, this concept of America. Now we've been through a little bit. So it was really interesting to see, their entire, and then of course some of the responses were like, oh, okay. It was just really interesting. So yes, it is productive, and it was like it generates an idea that you can take, and so many different things can come of it, like we see in the exhibition here. Beautiful work, that lyrical work that you did. I mean, that it reminds me of the formal response, you know, and so, but there's many, many layers to that. So I think it's still useful. Yeah. Yes.
So you alluded a couple times to the kind of energy behind a lot of this work coming, you know, post-2020, post-pandemic, and you even said kind of scrambling, and then people are institutions are trying to reckon with their past. And to what extent is this perhaps cynical or performative? And if that is the case, how might that undercut the generative possibilities of this work?
Oh my! I think that is time up. No. Yeah, that's I don't think it's cynical. I think it's truly something that people want to do, curators want to do, and it's a learning curve. So if this is the first stage, what's the next stage going to look like, and what's the next stage? Because those interventions are not just for the public, but the curators are learning from that. So I think that if you continue to work with it and work through it, you will have that. But it's funny because I'd never thought of it as being lazy, as a lazy curatorial move. But when I was doing some work on a show at the Met, on the bust Why Born a Slave, we had a Kara Walker and a Kehinde Wiley in that show, but it was really about 19th century sculpture. And the curator saying, well, I don't want it to seem like a lazy move to put these in. And I thought, oh, I didn't even think of that. Now oh gosh. It'll never come out of my mind. In lazy move meaning letting those works do all the work that we should be doing in interpreting. And so I didn't think of it like that, but it's something that we now have to now we've come to the point where we're now aware of, we don't want it to be a lazy move, we want to really be able to have good reasons for this. Yes.
I took a lot of art history in college, and I would have been very interested to see these African-American artists and how they interpreted the people that I learned about, because I learned about, going back to the Greeks and the Romans and the Etruscans and the kenosis and all that stuff, how art evolved, but I never learned any of this African-American comparisons. Do you see that changing in art history teaching?
Yes, and it depends on where you go and what book you use. We use Jansen or Gardner's Art Through the Ages, but Jansen only had one black artist in a lot of in the book, and I remember, and then no women artists. They've changed that. I think there might be 3 now, but they've changed that. But I mean, the institutions themselves with the surveys were very. But you could go and take courses focusing on that. Some of the work that some of the historians today have been trying to do for many years is to make sure you understand that African-American artists and art is part of American art, and just like you cannot separate the two. You can't separate African-American history from American history. It's all part and parcel at the same time. So, but not being included in the textbook, you've got to shape your own story. But hopefully all these stories are coming together. And now it's not just African-American. You know, we've got so many different kinds of quote-unquote Americans. So everybody is, I'm even getting pushback and calling people Americans at an exhibition that I'm doing at the Phillips. We were going to call it something about America, and they were like, no, America is many different things. You have to say United States, because America could be South America, Central. So it's very hard to even define who we are right now, and because we're so many different things, and we have to reflect that in the art histories. But in that survey course, I'm not sure how diverse that's going to be, because they still want you to learn the Etruscan to Picasso. Picasso. Well, we're done. We have 1 minute. I want to show you. I have to show you. Okay. Upcoming on, I'm not working on, but upcoming. This artist was in my show, Makita Ahuja, with her baby, and she responded again to Picasso's Demoiselle d'Avignon. That's the piece right there. I didn't even know what to tell you. And it's called Expect. She had trouble with her pregnancy, this was her response to the issue of Riffs and Relations, and she did this work specifically for that show, and it was wonderful that she brought her baby to the opening. So another curator friend of mine, now, fast forward to 2023, 2024, is curating a show called Refashioning Modernism's Africa, and she went back to Makita and asked her to respond to a Man Ray photograph of Adrienne L, the Guadeloupean dancer who was part of Man Ray and Picasso's Circle, and Nush Ullard. They were in a kind of interesting relationship with Man Ray and Picasso and a lot of his buddies there. And there was a lot of photographs, and actually Adrienne Fidlin was Man Ray's quote-unquote muse and lover for many years. And so Makita has come back into this conversation, and this will be shown in an exhibition coming up in the next few years. So it continues to be fruitful for some artists, and stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you can come back and see the exhibition many times before it closes in early September, September 8th. One more round of applause for Dr. Adrienne Child.